I've played over 300 board games, and I'm talking about that. We're on episode 2, and we're doing 291 to 286. Number 291, Battleships. This is a game that can be played on pencil and paper. Here's an old version that is given away as a promotional thing. You literally could just draw up a grid and play it. You're basically playing a solo game, and you're each playing your own game, really. You're just GMing each other's game, and it's a race to see who can get there first, but really it's a solo experience. There's a whole bunch of online versions, app versions. It's kind of pretty trivial when you actually get down to just playing it as a solo experience, and playing it with two players is kind of artificial. I owned an electronic version of this. Friends of the family or something gave me this crusty old copy of it. I owned the regular one too, but this thing was absurd. I so wanted it from the commercials, but like you had to enter in all your positions of all your ships just so you could hear some sound effects, and basically then you weren't having to worry about GMing the other person's game really, because the thing was doing it, but it took so long to set up. I don't think I ever played it, but this is one of those things I really wanted, and then when I got it was like, yeah, but I didn't have to pay anything for it, but it was so dusty and whatever. It had been sitting on top of someone's cupboard. The strategy's pretty trivial too. Like basically what you're wanting to do is some kind of a grid search thing. There's some discussion here about strategy and whatnot. I wouldn't leave gaps like that, but this is the right pattern. You've just sort of basically looking at doing every other line, every other square, and then on every other line you move it over one, and that way you're guaranteed to hit everything. There's a discussion about whether you should do this or not do this. I mean, if you've played it that many times that you're into all that, then you know there are other games. Yeah, it's 3 out of 10. It's not that exciting. There are better hidden deduction, two-player games, one-player versus a GM type games higher up on the list. Pick up sticks. I bought a copy of this with money that I won, coming second place in a piano Eisteddfod. When I'd moved to Queensland when I was about 10, and my family moved from New South Wales to Queensland, and we stayed with the family for a couple of weeks, and the oldest child was about a year younger than me. So there's 3 boys in that family. I had a younger sister. And so kind of by default, he became my friend, and I would stay over at his house from time to time. That petered out by the time we were in our early to mid-teens. But turns out, I didn't realise until I'd gone back and done this list, just how many board games we played together. And this was one of them. I'm pretty sure he had a set of this kind of basic kind of one, but I bought, I think it was this one, from a convenience store that was not that far from his house. I'd been at this Eisteddfod and I'd won like $1.50 or something. It's like some trivial amount of money. Managed to pick up a copy from a convenience store not far from his house, and I don't even know if we ended up playing it, but we did play pick up sticks at some point. This is a 6 out of 10. This is actually not too bad as dexterity games go. It's not going to be something you want to play over and over again, but it's something I would play. It's best played on carpet, which means it's really a kid's game, because you can drop them and the sticks will kind of stick into the carpet and do interesting patterns, and there's things you can do on a soft surface with manipulating the sticks to get them out that you can't necessarily do on a hard table. So that's how I would definitely play the game. But, you know, as dexterity games go, it's a classic and it's not too bad. Guess Who? Another deduction game where you're basically GMing the other person's game, and then it's a race to see who gets the answer first, but really it's a solo game that you GM for each other. This same guy that was this friend of mine after we moved to Queensland, he had a copy. We played this a bunch, but you very quickly know what questions to ask. I don't know how the new versions are, but in that version there were only, on the grid of, I don't know, 20 odd characters or whatever, there were only like about 5 or 6 women. And so the obvious question would be, is it a man or a woman? But you weren't allowed to ask that question on your first turn. There was actually a specific rule in the book that said you couldn't ask that as your first question, which is kind of dumb. Why didn't they just make it 50-50? I don't know. Whether a person had facial hair or not, that was the key question. That literally split the board down the middle. But once you figure out stuff like that, there's not a lot of game left there. I was like 11, 12 years old. The state of political correctness today, I would not want to play this game now. Draughts, or checkers, I think there is some small differences. Used to play this with my grandfather. He taught me to play chess and draughts, and if I wasn't in the mental sort of place to play chess, we'd play draughts. It's kind of depressing that this is so low on this list. You'll see there's another game that's the next one up. I'm about to talk about the fact that it gets a higher rating than this one. There is a World Federation of Draughts and an American Checkers Association. This is a game that has organised tournaments and world champions, and yet it's all the way down here, 21,877. It's lower than Connect 4 by one number. I had an electronic version, something like this, in about 2005. It wasn't the same. It was round like this, but it was it looked like a drafts piece. It had the ridge around the outside. It was like an oversized drafts piece. It was quite clever. I could not find a photo of this online. I don't know if it was by Radica. It might have been, but basically a bunch of these LCD games came out, and I had a bunch of them right around that time. It was just almost like a retro thing that a bunch of these LCD games came out. Like, I think they were super duper cheap too. They were available in Kmart at $15 or whatever Australian back then to buy an LCD game, when previously they'd been $40-50 or something for those like Nintendo Game & Watch and stuff like that. But I got quite good at it. It's an abstract game. It's not very exciting. It's not going to be interesting for repeated plays for me, but it's a solid 6 out of 10. It's as good as any other gamery abstract strategy game. I don't understand why this is so far down. I guess the core audience for Board Game Geek is not all that interested in checkers. Connect 4, exactly one rank higher than checkers or drafts, a game with international federations and whatnot. But this is not a bad game. It's a step up from tic-tac-toe. There's so many cheap and not so cheap versions of this floating around the world, as well as like electronic versions. I had this thing about the same time as that checkers game. I just went through a phase where I was collecting a bunch of them. Used to play this a bunch. I've played this with my kids when they're sort of old enough and whatever, and it's a decent enough game. It's a game you're going to see around the place from time to time in doctors' waiting rooms, or maybe not so much anymore, but you used to see this sort of thing in doctors' waiting rooms. It's pretty basic, but it's not terrible. Only takes a couple of minutes to play. It's you're going to have a first player advantage, and you're going to win by putting someone in a position where they don't have any choice but to allow you the win. Payday is a silly roll and move game. The board, this would be the version that we played, would have been about 1982. We didn't own it. We were on holidays in Queensland. When we lived in New South Wales, we had a tradition. We'd go and visit these friends of ours in Queensland and stay. Their children were sort of much older than me and my sister. But you do Queensland things, go to the beach and whatever, and play board games that belong to people whose house you're staying with, and this was one of them. You roll, you move, you get to the end of the month and you get your wages, and you got to pay all your bills. You get these spaces with the letterboxes on them, and you get to draw cards. It's kind of like the community chest in Monopoly, but they've got really humorous things. A lot of them are like dumb junk mail things or bills, advertisements for such and such at 25% off, and then it's got in brackets down the bottom 25% of the quantity, not the price or whatever. Very funny. It's good for a laugh. I played this with my mother around 1982, and probably my sister, I guess. One of the very few board games I played with my mother, because she just did not play board games. It is back in print. It is available in Australia in Kmart or Target, I'm not sure. I'm sure other parts of the world. It was not expensive. I seriously considered buying a copy, knowing that I would only ever play it once, and it would be a little bit of a nostalgia trip and some, silly fun. And then I just decided that actually, no, I've got too many really good board games. And that'll wrap up another one. Like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. And I'll see you on the next one.